Skull Hunter, you're the jewelry designer.
This is 007 Bloodstone. We're here on the Xbox 360. Be sure to like the video. Subscribing is great as well. So what are we getting here? It is 720p at 30 FPS. And yeah, this is kind of an interesting Bond. It's a Daniel Craig era take on the character, a third-person perspective with a little bit of smartphone integration as you kind of use that in your environment to be told where to go and do quick little mini games. But it's not quite as annoying as the smartphone is in some of the other Bond Activision era titles. So this one's neat because it's basically its own little story thing where it follows Bond trying to figure out who's behind basically everything. There's multiple villains and multiple different like perspectives, and there's kind of surprises and twists and turns. The plot is a little convoluted, and like honestly, I don't really get the connection to like the naming of it perfectly well. But like, yeah, it was an enjoyable Bond game. I actually had a good time playing it. It's got elements of kind of stealth and fast-paced action. You actually feel like Bond to a degree as you actually like, kind of take apart enemies and everything like that in very smooth, somewhat stealth-oriented segments, or you go a little bit more aggressive, or you kind of use your focus ability and annihilate people. You get a range of decent weapons. The levels are, very linear in design, but they actually work pretty well and pretty effectively. The differing difficulties also add little elements of extra kind of, activities, goals, all that kind of stuff. And you can get intel too as you use your phone to kind of like find, sort of like secrets and stuff. But this is what I was saying is like, the phone games literally come down to just pressing buttons. And that is actually really good because I literally am coming off of like Legends and I hated all of the weird phone stuff in that one. So it's nice that the phone stuff in this is simple, I guess you would say. Like, I actually really do genuinely prefer that. And you can't shoot the cameras, which kind of sucks a little bit, because that was my first instinct. It immediately turns on you. It's like, hey, you can't do that. Anyways, this is Bond on an adventure here. You're kind of sent to do some things, and it kind of leads you on this global chase. The whole thing really does feel like a bit of a Bond movie, pacing-wise. Like, there's always like a big driving sequence. You get to go to a bunch of like global type locations, as I mentioned. Like, there's actually quite a few scenarios that you take part in. And yeah, I actually quite liked what they had set up here. And as I said, you really do feel like Bond, like kind of getting down to business. Oh, jeez, except when you die pathetically. And the loading sometimes takes a little bit, but for the most part, it's actually pretty fast. But you can go in and you could be vicious and intense, and it takes like a bullet here to take guys out. And I quite like that. Like, you actually get a sense of feeling like a brutal, powerful Bond. And I think that's actually really quite nice to see in action. I mean, the auto aim might be a little too aggressive for some, but I actually quite like that you got in and you're like, wow, you actually feel the adrenaline of being like a Bond-like character moving throughout the environment and shooting folks. And, the third person actually does work well for this, and the game in general works fine as like, a nice little Bond game. I think they got like a really good kind of Bond girl in this one. She's a lot of fun, Nicole there. And then, you get to see some like different types of characters, and there's a good bout of humor. It feels like a fun, original kind of story that does actually fit into the Craig era. It's not like those other Bonds that are just like recreating, different other games or other moments. This one kind of actually does sort of try to stand out by itself. Now, there was also a multiplayer component, but the multiplayer is all non-existent at this point. So, that's kind of there. You just enjoyed the single player. But yeah, I like the single player campaign in this one. I actually had a good amount of time with it. Oh, and there's some like parkour stuff, and yeah, they do actually have some fun with things. And they don't ever like sort of slow things down, if that makes sense. Like, you actually you know, you keep going, you keep doing stuff, you're always moving through different environments. Like, I think they actually kind of, for the most part, sort of nail this one in regards to just, like, keeping it flowing while making it feel like an actual Bond film. And it's just kind of really enjoyable, especially coming off of Legends, and, you know, actually having fun with this one and stuff. Because it's just like an enjoyable Bond game. But yeah, you know, it is really linear. It is kind of like some of the driving sequences are a little silly and a little, like, tiresome almost to deal with. But, like, they're fun, you know? And I mean, it's Bizarre Creations, so, like, you know, they gotta do their driving sequences. They're kind of cool little things, and you know, they tried different stuff with the Bond missions, and they had little different objectives that you were taking part in. I think they did a solid job on it. It's, you know, kind of, it's a memorable Bond game, is what I would say. And I never really felt like doing any of the side stuff was, like, tedious. It actually kind of felt natural to, like, your missions and what your goals were. And the shooting felt really visceral and fast, and you know, everything did run pretty well, and nothing was, like, too annoyingly tiring to deal with. And yeah, they actually did, like I said, a pretty good job on this one, I would say. It was actually quite enjoyable. It's not like the longest sort of Bond game either, but at the same time, you know, it's enjoyable, it works, it gets the job done, it provides some different, like, combative scenarios for you to work towards and do stuff, and there's a little bit of, like, you know, over-the-topness, and they have fun, too, is the biggest thing with this one. Like, it's, you know, they don't miss a moment to have, like, a quick little cutscene of Bond jumping out from an explosion, or, like, you know, you doing something crazy in a car, or you jumping from, like, a car to a plane or something like that. They really, really actually try to make it feel intense, and I think that's really quite cool. Like, honestly. Okay, well, that guy's going a little intense in there. Yeah, I'm trying to, like, mix up the combat a little bit so you can see different things, but usually I would just run and go pop, 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 and just, like, kind of smoke everybody, because it's a little easier to kind of do that. But, you know, I'm trying to make it look... trying to add a little bit of flair and style to things, basically. If that makes sense. But yeah, you can literally just, like, kind of sit beside or behind cover, run between areas, smack guys around. It's really quite good. But yeah, the plot, little nonsensical at times. It's just kind of like, you know, you're in one area and then you're in another area and there's, like, a new guy you're chasing and a new person. It actually feels more like a natural, like I say Bond movie because, you know, it's got the big action points and stuff. But it actually kind of, like, makes sense more from, like, an actual agent perspective, where you're sort of, like, actually following a trail of evidence, and you just happen to go on this adventure, and that adventure. And it just so happens that this stuff's all connected and that, and it actually works as a plot line. I just wish the plot was a little, like, tighter, if that made sense, like a little bit more sensical, basically, where it's like, you know, why you're doing this, how this all kind of goes together, because it's like, it's really interesting how everything goes, and I don't want to, like, obviously spoil anything. I want to keep it fresh for people, but, like, you know, how it does all kind of come together is sort of, like, really, you know, neat for surprises, but it's also, like, kind of just like, huh, that's you know, that was a little unexpected out of nowhere, but yeah, kind of clever. But I did enjoy the spaces. I did enjoy the fun with it. Like, that's really, like, a big part of a Bond game for me, is something that's, like, actually, you know, enjoyable and interesting and different and brings you to some cool places and has some more adventures for you. I do wish it was a bit, you know, kind of longer, though. Like, you know, it is a little bit short. And it doesn't necessarily take a whole lot of effort to go through. And I didn't like, there was, like, a taser kind of, like, stealth type scene, which not really stealth, but I don't know, I didn't really love that one either. I do wish we could have had, you know, kind of multiplayer action stuff going on, but, like, honestly, it's not too bad. And, you know, they do mix things up in a level too. Like you mentioned, obviously it's very linear, but, you know, with that, you are, like, at times parkouring or climbing, or there's action sequences, or there's, like, some sort of battle boss scenario where you're, like, you know, that's in a cutscene that happens, and it's really action-packed and cool, and, you know, Bond's doing his thing, and he's trying to figure out this stuff, and you know, everything goes all haywire, like, and it's got like a really heavy sense of like film grain. So like talking about the visuals, you know, I do think this actually looks decent, and I think it holds up probably a little better than you would expect, but that's largely due to the fact that it's got like a heavy film grain usage. I mean, I think you likely have been able to see that, you know, gameplay-wise, that it's so heavy on the film grain. But it does actually kind of, you know, make sense. It makes it feel a little bit more like a movie, I guess, which is what they were kind of going for. Like, obviously, like, there's, you know, there's cinematics and stuff, but, like, it's really quite aged. You know what I mean? It's, like, definitely 360 era, like, cutscenes and cinematic moments, and, you know, it's Daniel Craig. Like, it's good for the time, but it's also sort of, like, it looks quite silly at this point, and, you know, a lot of the environments, especially the driving sequences, like, pretty low-res assets. Like, there's a whole bunch of scenes where it's, like, you know, like, bare minimum visual assets for a lot of areas, and it's just kind of like, you know, this could have looked a lot better. It's one of those ones where I'm like, it's enjoyable for what it is, but I don't see it ever really being available again, if that makes sense. Like, kind of had its time. It's like a nice time capsule Bond of a simpler era of just like crazy shooting action. But I did enjoy playing it. It's kind of a cool little thing, a good time. You know, you really get to feel that like high adrenaline action of being like Bond and going out there and just like smoking enemies that try to get in your way. And the executions and stuff are pretty cool, or I guess they're not really executions, but like, you know, the big knockout moments, like Bond actually uses the environment well, and, you know, you actually kind of see him like interacting with the environment, and I think that's kind of nice. And then the cover-based system works okay. Yeah, I don't mind a third-person Bond title, but it is also a bit weird. But it fits. You get to see the character a bit more. You know, this whole Activision era of like running Daniel Craig into different Bond games. But at least in this one, it like, you know, it's an actual story that sort of feels like his character, and it doesn't feel like he's just shoved into other Bond moments. Like, you know, like those other Activision games did Bond, and they just like did random things. It's so much easier just to like actually, like, I'm trying to do the blind firing to work towards the blind fire achievement, but just like quick aiming in and getting like headshots is just like an insta kill basically. And it's like the most effective way to actually like, you know, sort of eliminate your targets, and then you can like kind of run at them too. Unless more appear out of nowhere and attack you. That could be annoying. There's also some really crazy like shooting sequences where you have like literally shooting gallery segments where there's explosives everywhere. They look so cool. That's the thing though, it really does kind of feel like Bond, where he's just sort of like thrown into all these segments and he just deals with it. He just logically puts stuff together. It almost feels a little bit more agent-like, and kind of uses his smarts a little bit more than maybe even the line of movies kind of did, in regards to having him actually like, you know, make choices and logically follow a trail of evidence to where he's going. But it also does kind of just string you along to these different points. It's really hard to kind of say like, you know, if you think about it as a game, it's like, you know, it's okay. Like, it's solid, it's decent, you know, it's a shooter you play. As a Bond, it's kind of like, no, it's not bad, it's pretty good. It's an interesting standard, because I'm like, I don't know if this would really be that intriguing if it was just, like, not a Bond title. You get what I mean? Like, if you didn't have Bond in here, I don't know how, like, interesting it would be. It would be just, like, generic agent guy kind of shoots a bunch of guys, and then it ends. But yeah, no, I like the Bond girl in this one. Was kind of fun. Nicole was pretty cool. They did a good job with her, and she makes sense. They should have went with a sillier, more Bond-like name, I guess, but, you know. And the humor and stuff feels Bond-like. It feels very much, again, like a Daniel Craig-type movie, which is what the goal was, I believe, the G36. Didn't really get to use that many times. Yeah. And then the cinematics again. It's so funny, like, the cars literally look like they're floating. Which is so funny. It's like they're not actually, like, planted on the ground. And then you get the loading between levels, which isn't honestly too bad. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is like, it's a good few hours and a half, 3.5 hours, 4 hours maybe, kind of mission thing, good for different difficulties perhaps, grab some intel hidden on levels. There's different stuff you can do in different scenarios, and yeah, they have fun with it. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of a fun adventure. It's a neat sort of thing. It's a capsule of its time. If you were to see this come back again, I don't know if they would. I really can't see this one being like quite standout enough that they would want to do it. Like, it's enjoyable, but it's not like, let's remember, you'd almost have to pack it in like an era of like Bond games of that like time almost, if that makes sense, in order to make it appealing enough to kind of re-release it, because I'm not sure you'd really get your value out of it. Like, the multiplayer might have been neat, but there were so many, like, Activision was like literally pumping out kind of Bond games with a multiplayer attached to it. Now, I'm sure if you had your choice, you'd probably go with the GoldenEye Reloaded, right? Over the multiplayer setup in this one. There was also like Quantum of Solace, and at least there was Bond variety, right? If that makes sense. Like, at least there actually was some variety for Bond games. I would have actually liked if we would have gotten even more Daniel Craig type Bond games that weren't just strictly kind of stuck in the concept of like being something else, right? Like, you throw him into GoldenEye Reloaded, that's not his stuff. You throw him into Legends, that's not his stuff. And it's just kind of like, it's weird, right? Like, when that happens, it definitely feels a bit off. But yeah, you do actually get, like, this is a bit more spy-oriented, but you still got the big explosion things, and they do a pretty neat job with a lot of the concepts of this one. Like, it feels about right. It's not, like, mind-blowing, but it feels about right for what a Bond movie as a game should be. And then the other question would be, like, should they have maybe focused on making it more of a Bond-type game over Bond-type movie? That's interesting, right? Oh, I accidentally, I was supposed to, I think I was supposed to stealthily deactivate the camera and then do it. Yeah, nothing like going to good old Serbia. I think taking out these guards is probably actually doing him a bit of a favor in regards to, who wants to be kind of stuck in Siberia, right? Bop, 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 bop. I don't know, it's decently well polished. It's enjoyable, it gets the job done, you get some action, you get to shoot some things, you get to have some fun with it. It's not too serious, but it's like, it's Bond of this area is serious, so it's not like it's fun, ridiculous, over the topness. But they never missed a moment to be like, Bond's leaping from a crane and like explosions, and Bond's doing this, and crazy car seat and adrenaline action, and making the fun usual jokes, and it's still somehow throwing it in a like not necessarily a mature rated sort of scenario. Nothing like going to a club where you could buy the service of a lady, but they're all bikinied up in, Taiwan or whatever, but it is kind of funny. Those guys just, like, literally appeared. Very, very humorous. This is what I was saying, though, is like, you're actually doing, like, in this part, you have to, like, do spy type things. You have to actually, like, match certain audio levels and stuff. Like, that's neat and something different. But it doesn't feel slow. It doesn't feel like it takes you out of, like, what's going on. Like, you actually feel like you're doing something that contributes to the actual plot of your game. But at the same time, the plot itself was a little, like, convoluted. So, I don't know. It matches well. It's not like I'm sitting there having to wait to do some sort of silly mini-game. I'm actually, actually actively enjoying something that's going on and not feeling like I'm doing something ridiculously weird. So I think they mostly hit the mark on this one.
location on your
It was
smartphone.
mostly a fun time.
Copy. I'm on my way.
Welcome, Mr. Pomeroy.
Love how he's just like, oh, this guy just opened the door with his phone, it's cool.